Thank you, Matt. Well, good morning, everybody. So, as you're aware, we're going to be looking into the book of Job this morning. And I'm sure that some of you before have heard or read those famous verses at the end of the chapter there, chapter 19. They've inspired many songs over the years. People have written songs. Don't know if you ever listened to Handel's Messiah, but one of the songs in there is I Know That My Redeemer Liveth. Now we're going to find out much more this morning about Job as a character. We're also going to touch on human suffering as well. But above all, we're going to find out about God and his character. Job had a lot to contend with and wrestle with, but ultimately he found that God is a faithful God who cared deeply for Job. So when did Job live? Well, we don't know exactly. It was an awful long time ago. Some people would say he lived before Noah. Some people would say he lived around the time of Abraham. But this is one of the oldest books that we have in our Bibles. And whilst this book might be thousands of years old, the experiences that Job went through are still directly relevant to us today. And as Matt has already said, there's various sayings that we'd get from the book of Job, which perhaps you'll hear today. So you might hear sayings such as the patience of Job. I don't know if you ever heard that. Or you might hear someone say Job's comforters. And that's where perhaps someone is speaking with you, but they end up making you feel worse about the situation rather than better. So I just want to look a little bit about the structure of Job. What kind of book is it? What's it all about? It's a unique book. There's no other book like the book of Job in our Bibles. It's a tough book in places. Felt sorry for Joe reading this morning. That's a pretty tough passage to come and read. It's not very uplifting for the first 3 quarters. But in this book, I've found, certainly personally, that it can really encourage us in our walk with God. And when you read Job, it's like reading a play. There's a number of key characters in there. If you've ever got the time, I'd encourage you to sit down and read the entire book of Job in one go. You just get it all the way from the beginning, all the way to the end. And it's got a great finish as the book of Job. It's a fascinating story. So we've got some of the key characters there on the screen now. You've got God, you've got the devil, Job, Mrs. Job, and then you've got some friends of Job, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, strange names, and then Elihu. Kath's nodding there in appreciation. Bildad is known as the shortest man in the Bible. If you don't understand that, go and speak to Kath. That's what's known as a dad joke. And I know that Kath was brought up on a good, strong foundation of dad jokes, weren't you, Kath? Yeah. So Kath will explain that for you. Now, Job is structured. It's like a sandwich. You've got a beginning, a prologue, and you've got an end. And then in the middle of Job, you've got 35 chapters of dialogue. And that's what we picked up right in the middle of Job there, chapter 19. And imagine it's like a debate. It's like a fight. You've got 3 rounds. So Job's got 3 friends. Those three friends and Job have a debate. It's round 1. And then they go back for another go. It's round 2. They go back for a third go. That's round 3. And then Elihu comes in right at the end. And he's just a monologue. He just goes for chapters and chapters. That's an overview of Job. But where I want to pick up on this morning, and Matt's already just given us a little bit of insight, is we read right in the middle there how Job was feeling in chapter 19. But why was Job feeling like that? Why would he ever say those words? Why would they be written down? Well, the plot, the storyline of Job is absolutely fascinating because there's 2 storylines that are interwoven. There's what you might call the heavenly storyline, and there's a picture painted in heaven, which we'll find out a bit more about, which is where God and the devil are contending. And then we've got what is happening to Job on the earth. And those two storylines are interwoven all the way throughout Job. And that creates a real tension as you read the story and find out what happens. Now, if you want to go and find out about the background, you have to read the first 2 chapters of Job. We're not going to do that now. We're actually going to listen to a song. This song's by a musician called Don Francisco. We were playing a little bit earlier. Matt recognised his voice. He's got quite a distinctive voice and style. This guy's been singing for years. When I first started listening to this guy, I'd get his music on a cassette tape. Some of you probably think that's pretty cutting edge, and you're thinking, yeah, it's all about LPs. Well, I was getting on a cassette tape at the time, and then CDs. So I want you to listen. It might not be your style, this, but I want you to listen to this. The lyrics are going to be up on the screen, and hopefully this will just give you some insight into the book of Job. Thank you, Isaac. That song paints a real picture, doesn't it, of why Job was in such a dark place, why he's in such a challenging place. Now, I trust that's given you a backdrop to the book. I just want to touch on one area just before we get into the passage we're looking at today. And that's this topic of God versus the devil. In that account that we've just heard in the song there, and if you were to read the opening 2 chapters, you find all about the interaction between God and the devil. And that could raise a whole number of questions for us. As Christians, rightly so, we should be wary of the devil and his schemes. However, we're not to live in outright fear of the devil because God is sovereign and he rules over all. It can be easy for us sometimes to fall into maybe inaccurate thinking or unhelpful thinking as we consider the spiritual world. You see, the ancient Greeks, and they influence our thinking even today, they would divide the world into the physical and the supernatural. And that distinction, I understand that, but that would put God and the devil in the same category, to say, well, they're spiritual and we're physical beings. But that's not the way the Bible makes a distinction. The Bible says God is the creator God and everything else is a created being. And when we start to think like that, it starts to change the way that we think. We say, okay, if God is the creator God, what does that mean about God? What do we think about God and his character, who he is? Well, God is omnipotent. It's a big word. It means that God is all-powerful. Is the devil omnipotent? No, he's not. The devil is not all-powerful. We say that God is omniscient. That means God knows everything. Does the devil know everything? No, he doesn't. We say that God is omnipresent. That means that God is everywhere, all at once. Is the devil everywhere, all at once? No, he's not. So it's really important as Christians that we understand that God is the creator God and he rules and he is sovereign over all. God is infinitely more powerful than the devil, and that's so important as we look into the Bible. So we've considered this morning, haven't we? We've got these 2 plots. You've heard just about that in the song there. These 2 storylines. And we can see that the book of Job, that's what it's all about. These 2 plots get kind of worked out. And right at the heart of this is this question. The devil is going after Job's heart. That's what he wants. He wants Job to turn round and to reject God. The devil wanted to do that for Job, and he wants to do that for each one of us today and everybody on earth. That desire of the devil has not changed. And Job, he had a choice. He could decide who he was going to follow. And that same choice applies today. That hasn't changed. It applies to you, it applies to I, and to everybody else. So really, although the book is unique, the aim of the devil has not changed for 1 minute. He's still after people's hearts. So these speeches, this is what we're going to start looking at now in chapter 19. What are they all about? There's some big questions that are asked in these speeches. It really gets down to some of the kind of philosophical questions of life. Job and his friends start debating things like why we're here, what's life all about, what's God's involvement, is God interested in us as people, does God care, why do good people suffer? That's one of the questions right at the heart of this book. But these are not just questions of philosophy, they're theological questions, because Job is somebody who fears God. And as Matt has already kind of said in the introduction, really, it's okay to ask why. Many people in the Bible ask why. They want to know why they're in a situation. Why does God seem so distant? Job believes that his God is somebody who created him and he can have a relationship with, and yet he seems so far away. And really, I suppose if I had to summarise the speeches, Job's friends are convinced that these bad things have happened to Job because he sinned, because he's done something wrong. And yet Job is adamant that he's not sinned, that he's innocent, as it were, and he protests his innocence. And we still wrestle with those questions today, don't we? We all live with things that go wrong, and we think, why? Why do these things go wrong? So I just want to turn our attention now to chapter 19 that we've read. Now, Joanne read that passage for us earlier, and there's some tough verses in this passage that we're going to look at this morning. I've just got up there some of the phrases, as it were, that we read. This is from the first 22 verses from that passage. And as you read through that, if we were to stop at verse 22, it would be pretty dismal Sunday together, to be blunt, because there's not much in those verses that you can take away and be uplifted by. But this was a really serious situation that Job was in. We've gained some insight here into Job's anguish. Let's not make light of this or play this down. Job, he'd suffered enormous and sudden loss in his life. He was financially ruined. His health had failed. The majority of his friends had rejected him. Job was in a really dark place. Well, what are we to make of this? You see, the Bible is an honest book. It doesn't shy away from recording how people felt, what they did, whether that was good or bad. Now, we know that Job is not unique in going through suffering. Many one of us have gone through suffering in our lives, and maybe we still are. To be human and to live in the fallen world in which we do almost inevitably brings times of intense suffering. Along with Job, we can identify with him because we know what it means to suffer and to be rejected. Now, I think I can say with some confidence that this last year has probably been one of the toughest years that each one of us in our lives have gone through. Our comparatively comfortable Western lives have been turned upside down by the pandemic that we still are in. Our lives have been fundamentally changed. And from a personal perspective, I think the hardest element to this for me has been the impact on personal relationships. It's that inability to socialise with friends or family that's probably hit me the hardest. The lack of face-to-face fellowship with my Christian brothers and sisters. I've sorely missed that. But I think the thing I've probably found the hardest has been the separation from friends and family in the time of a crisis. When someone's ill, someone's drawing towards the end of their life, to be forcibly separated at that time, that's brutal. That's so hard to handle. And as we see this morning, Job is asking this question, why? And I'm sure many of us in this last year have also asked, why? Why is this happening? Why am I going through this? As Job speaks in this book on 36 separate occasions, he asked God to speak to him. Job felt that God was so distant in his suffering. And maybe you've asked the same thing. Maybe you said, where's God? In my current circumstances in life, whatever they may be, you say, well, where's God? Why does God seem so distant? Don't be shy about asking that. That's a valid question. The Bible tells us time and time again about people who desperately searched for God. But I want us just to think a little bit more about the suffering that Job was going through. Do we just shrug our shoulders and say, okay, well, bad things happened. Job was suffering. You see, there really is something in what Job said when he protested his innocence. The very first verse of Job chapter 1, verse 1, says this: "There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil." Job was a good guy. The Bible says that he shunned evil. So if we take a step back, we say, so now we have a picture of a blameless man who was unjustly accused by his friends as having done wrong. He suffered much emotionally, physically, spiritually. Now this should put us in mind of our Lord Jesus Christ. You see, when we read the Old Testament, and I know you've heard this many times before, but when you read the Old Testament, you read about things or you read about people who point you to Jesus. We're studying Hebrews, aren't we, in a minute, as a church? Hebrews looks back to the tabernacle, and it says the tabernacle points us to Jesus. When we read about Job, we read about a good man who suffered. That should point us towards Jesus. If there was ever a good man, a truly good man who lived, who didn't deserve to suffer, that was Jesus. Now, I don't know about you, but when I start to think about that, that starts to change the way I think. It doesn't make the suffering go away. It doesn't make the suffering any less painful, but it should start to change our outlook on suffering. I just want you to maybe look again at some of those verses I've got up there on the screen. Just look at some of those phrases and maybe think about Jesus as he was on his way to be crucified, as it were. Think about how Jesus felt. Think about the fact that Jesus was rejected. Think about the place that Jesus was in. It's almost like we could apply those words directly to the way that Jesus felt. Jesus knew what it meant to be betrayed. He knew what it meant to be falsely accused, to be denied, to be mocked, to not be believed, to be blasphemed against, to be rejected, to be publicly humiliated, to be crucified. But above all, Jesus knew what it meant to be separated from his own Father. So rest assured, friends, that we have a Saviour that we can turn to who doesn't just know in some theoretical way what suffering is, but Jesus has truly suffered. Jesus knows what it means to suffer. He's experienced suffering beyond what we could imagine. So I would encourage you, friends, in a time of suffering, turn to Jesus. Jesus knows. He knows what it feels like, but turn to him. And now I just want to spend some time thinking about the last part of this chapter. There's a complete change, as it were. And from verse 23 onwards of Job 19, we would get to this great phrase, which I'm sure many of you heard before: "I know that my Redeemer lives." So Job was in this really dark place, really tough place, and yet we see here just this statement, this faith that shines through, as it were. Now, just before we dive into this, it would be tempting, wouldn't it, to read those verses and say, well, Job was just definitely speaking about Jesus. And undoubtedly, as Christians, we would take these verses and apply them to Jesus, and rightly so. But I just want to remind us that Job lived an awful long time before Jesus, as did everybody in the Old Testament. And there was as the prophets spoke more about the coming Messiah, there was a picture that built up. God progressively revealed his plan throughout the Old Testament, and that picture became complete when Jesus came to this earth. Job probably had a slightly different outlook to maybe what you and I would do in terms of eternal life. We look back and we see Jesus, and he came the first time. We see he's going to come the second time, and then there'll be eternal life. Your average Jewish person all those years ago probably wouldn't have had quite so clear view of that. They would have thought that a dead person would have gone to what they would have called Sheol, which is a place of the dead. And that's one of the reasons why in Jewish culture there's such a desire for justice to be done in their lifetime. They wanted justice to be done then. As Christians, I think we look at it and we say, okay, God will ultimately bring justice. So we read, don't we, in verse 23 of chapter 19, "Oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that an iron pen and lead, they were engraved in the rock forever." So the implication here is that Job is making a declaration. Sometimes in our own lives, there's times when we make a public declaration. Public declarations I've made are getting married. It's a very public declaration. Laura and I stood up in front of witnesses, as it were. We make a public declaration. We're nailing our colours to the mast. Another public declaration I made is being baptised. I'm stood right on top of the baptistry now, and some of you will have seen people get baptised here. That's a public declaration. In a legal setting, words are so important. I don't know if you've ever signed a legal document. In today's modern era, the wet signature is still a thing, isn't it? So you print out this big old document, however many pages it is, but you still want somebody to physically sign it with a real pen. So writing something down is of significant importance. And in this dark place that Job was, he said, what I'm about to say, I want this to be written down forever. He's making a statement. He's saying, this is where I stand. We don't know if Job knew that his words were going to be written down forever, but indeed they were. His heart's desire was met because we can read his words today. So what was it that Job was so eager to say? What was it that he wanted to get out there, as it were? Well, Job, of course, he wanted to declare his faith in God. He wanted to make a statement about the God in whom he believed. Now, these verses 25 to 27, are absolutely fantastic verses. Depending on the version of the Bible you'll have, you may have a few footnotes in them, because actually they're quite challenging verses to translate. Scholars have struggled, I suppose, with some of the words that are in there. But I just want us to think about three elements, three different aspects, and you could probably do a whole series of studies on these verses, but just very briefly, three different things from these verses. Just get the next slide, please, Isaac. The first thing is that Job says, I know. Now, Job's declaration is personal. We shouldn't be surprised by that on one level. Job's the guy who's speaking. But there's no scope for ambiguity, is there? When you read, I know, you understand exactly what Job is saying. He's saying, it's me, I'm the one speaking, and I know. It's not I think, or a hope, or maybe. Job says, I know. Now that is really important. Chris was speaking the other week, and he was talking about the fact that our Christian faith is personal. Now, our Christian lives are to be lived out in public, but what Chris was saying, he's saying that it comes down ultimately to between ourselves and God, our relationship between ourselves and God. That's personal. And we're going to be studying, as Matt has just said, in Hebrews chapter 11, about men and women of faith in the Bible, but their faith was personal, because you can't have somebody else's faith. It doesn't make sense. I was very privileged. I grew up in a Christian household. My mum and dad are committed Christians. They were when I was young. They are now. And without a doubt, I heard my dad say, I love Jesus. I follow Jesus. I heard my mum say, I follow Jesus. But to hear them say that, that's not good enough. That just means I've heard that my dad follows Jesus. What about me? Do I follow Jesus? Because it becomes personal. And this is the question that each one of us faces. This is a question that everybody faces. This was the battle between God and the devil to win a person's heart. So it's personal. It's a personal faith. And Job made that personal statement. He said, I know. The challenge is whether each one of us can join Job with that same level of conviction when he says, I know. Don't be content with merely knowing people who know God. Don't be content with merely being in a church, hearing people preach. Strive to be in that position yourself and say, I know. Now the next thing that Job says, he says, I know my Redeemer lives. And the word Redeemer here is a word that you often come across in the Old Testament. You've probably heard of this concept before of something called a kinsman redeemer. You've probably heard sermons on kinsman's redeemer. Very famously, in the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, Ruth's relative Boaz is described as a kinsman's redeemer. Now, a kinsman's redeemer would be a relative who would have a responsibility to protect maybe a more vulnerable relative, a responsibility to ensure that justice was done, that any wrongs that were there were avenged and were righted, that vindication was done. It's a beautiful picture. I'm sure many of you, as I said, have read Ruth before, and you've got a concept of what a kinsman redeemer would do. Kinsman redeemer was needed when you're vulnerable, when you can't help yourself, when you're lost. You need someone to come along and to step in and to sort things out. Now, I just want to think very briefly. We would say, yeah, Jesus is our Redeemer. Jesus is our kinsman's Redeemer. And that's true. But in the story of Ruth and Boaz, Boaz was related to Ruth by blood. Well, Jesus isn't our kin, as it were. Jesus had no family obligation to step in to come and save me. Jesus is our kinsman's redeemer because he chose to be. And that's significant, isn't it? When we think about Jesus being our redeemer, he didn't have a family obligation. He chose to be our redeemer. And I find that amazing. You see, a kinsman's redeemer would come and ensure that justice was done at that time. They would protect the vulnerable. But our kinsman redeemer in Jesus, yes, he protects the vulnerable. Yes, he ensures that justice is done. But he also paid the price for those things that we'd willingly done. I find that so amazing that Jesus would actively choose to come and save me and to pay the price for those things that I'd willingly done wrong. Job was, in many ways, searching for vindication, for justice to be done at that time. But we need to be truly redeemed. That's what the Bible says, that we've been bought at a price, that we're a new creation. Now, Job makes this really basic statement. He says, I know my Redeemer lives. I'm stating the obvious here, but isn't it so important that our Redeemer is alive? We've spoken, haven't we, about the book of Ruth. I just want you to imagine that story. Imagine if Boaz was dead. Just play the story through in your mind. So there's Ruth, there's Naomi. They come back to Naomi's hometown. And where's the Redeemer? He's dead. He's in his grave. He's useless. You need a Redeemer that's alive. And in our Lord Jesus Christ, we have a Redeemer who is alive. And that's so important. Don't ever lose sight of the fact that our Saviour is alive. One of the verses that we read just on Wednesday evening in our time together as a Bible study as a church, from Hebrews chapter 10, just going to read from verse 19. It says, "Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way." It goes on. But you caught that, didn't you? By the new and living way. Jesus is our living Redeemer. Job could say, I know that my Redeemer lives. You and I can say exactly the same thing. I know that my Redeemer lives. And then finally, I just want to think about a phrase that Job uses when he says, I shall see, or my eyes shall behold. He actually says, or he sort of hammers that point home, I suppose, 3 times over. You see, Job's faith in his Redeemer wasn't just in some kind of nebulous spiritual entity. Job believed that he was going to see his Redeemer with his own eyes. Job believed that his relationship with his God was going to be restored, and that ultimately he could look forward to seeing his Redeemer with his own eyes. You and I have exactly the same hope. It's exactly what we can look forward to. We believe that our Redeemer lives, but we look forward to a time when we will be able to look upon our Redeemer with our own eyes. The Bible tells us that we will marvel when we see Jesus. We'll see Jesus in all of his glory. This, for me, was really the point, I suppose, that the devil knew that he wasn't going to turn Job's heart. The devil had been trying, he'd thrown everything he'd got at him. He'd, for want of a better expression, he'd wrecked Job's life. And yet Job then says, write this down. He says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and I'm going to see him. Imagine how the devil must have felt at that point. He'd lost, hadn't he? A man he'd put into absolute crisis said, I know that my Redeemer lives. I'm going to see him. Job's desire to see his Redeemer was absolutely intense. It says that his heart faints within me. Sorry, I just need to find my last page here. Slight technical hitch. Just give me 1 minute. I think it's over here. Bet some of you are really excited. You thought it was going to end then, didn't you? Disappointment when I found the last page. Imagine how my kids feel having to put up with this every day, but I do it without notes as well at home, don't I, kids? Just preach away. So, we've seen, haven't we, the battle for Job's heart. We've seen God and the devil vying for Job's heart, and we've seen that Job was able to declare that he knew his Redeemer lived. Now, just as we draw to a close now, I just want us just to think about a few things. Was Job's faith born out of this time of crisis? Did Job suddenly develop this amazing faith when time was tough? I'll put it to you that Job had developed his faith before this crisis. Job had got to know his God before times got tough. I believe that Job got rooted in his faith before the tough times came along. Yes, Job's faith increased. We can see that. But he got rooted. And a verse came to mind just as I was preparing when Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. In Colossians chapter 2 and verse 6, we'd read this. Therefore, as you received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him, and established in faith, just as you were taught, abounding in thanksgiving. Make sure to get established in your faith now. The Bible's very clear that the church will face persecution. Each one of us knows, sadly, that we're going to face tough times in our lives. But get established in your faith now. Job's faith wasn't defined by the situation in which he found himself. Job's faith was defined by the God in which he trusted. And that's so important, isn't it? If we let the circumstances that we find ourselves in define our faith, we'll struggle. But if our faith is defined by the God in whom we trust and his character, we'll be stood on a solid foundation. It doesn't change the circumstances, it doesn't reduce the pain, it doesn't make it necessarily any easier, but our faith will be solid if it's rooted in Christ Jesus. So the challenge this morning is, can each one of us say with the level of assurance that Job did, I know my Redeemer lives. Now, chapter 19 actually ends with quite a sobering last verse, or last couple of verses. In verse 28 of chapter 19 we read, if you say, how we will pursue him, and the root of the matter is found in him, be afraid of the sword, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment. Job's clear, isn't he, that there will come a time of judgment. The gospel message is one of utmost importance, but it's also one of utmost urgency. It's important because somebody's soul and their eternal destiny is at stake. But it's urgent because each one of us needs to decide now. We need to decide now whether we're going to follow God or not. So I'd urge you, don't harden your hearts. Be like Job. Excuse me. Get to know God now. Get your faith rooted in God. The New Testament tells us that our Redeemer, Jesus, the one who is dead and is now alive, is returning to judge the earth. Let us be people who expectantly wait for Jesus, because at that point we'll be able to look upon Jesus, our Redeemer, with our own eyes. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Steve. We're going to have a song now, tying in with what Steve's been preaching this morning, and from that particular verse, I know that my Redeemer lives. After that, we're going to take communion together. But let's take this time just to worship and to chew over the things we've heard this morning. No, we're not. I've bodged it. So, yeah, no worries, Isaac. Don't worry about it. We will take communion, and I wonder if somebody could nip out and tell that. Oh, he's on it. Jib's on it. Fantastic. Thank you. So yeah, the children are going to come back in. They're Sunday school teachers, and communion